Miranda Yardley is a transsexual and human rights activist and joins me live on the line. Evening to you, Miranda.
Evening, Krista. How are you doing?
Thanks for taking the time to talk to us here on Talk Radio. Let's talk about J.K. Rowling. Of course, something I've not mentioned is that Daniel Radcliffe has now come out and sort of rubbished some of the things that she said and linked to, hasn't he?
He has, and considering that Daniel owes his career to J.K. Rowling, I think it's quite astonishing that he put that many knives into her back the way that he did. Also, I would like to point out to Daniel Radcliffe that in his statement, he talks about trans women are women. He doesn't mention trans men being men at all. So he is applying a double standard.
Do you think that he's trying to sort of encompass it all, because it was particularly around trans women that J.K. Rowling was referring to, and because of the fact that it was about the word woman in the context of menstruating, would that perhaps not have been an explanation as to why Daniel Radcliffe specifically focused on whether trans women were women?
I think it's an interesting omission. I'd like to know whether or not he thinks trans men are men. I don't know what his sexual orientation is, and I'd be wondering whether if he was heterosexual himself.
I think he is. As far as I'm aware, I think he is.
So would he date a trans woman? Or is he just another one of these men who make all of these noises? He say, yes, trans women are women, but, in small letters at the bottom it says apart from relationship purposes. And
do you genuinely feel that is the case, that this happens, that there are some, I'll be honest, I'm a gay man myself.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't think I'm going to be as what's the word? I don't think I'm going to make a sweeping statement to say that I would never date a trans man, that is a woman who has transitioned to become a man. I can't say that I never would. However, I think that certainly due to the physical attributes that me as a man is attracted to in another man, if some of those attributes were perhaps lacking, certainly on paper, I think I would find it a challenge. Now, have I just said something horribly transphobic by admitting that, or not? Because I'm so confused about the rules of this now.
Well, be my guest, please, and define transphobia. What even is transphobia anymore? The Wings of Scotland blog did a great little piece upon what transphobia is, and there was a huge list there of things that were transphobic, and it was literally everything from the weather to Miranda Yardley. Apparently, a transsexual who's lived this life for quite a long time, is also transphobic. Your sexual orientation is based upon biological sex, and I think trans people owe it to themselves, not just other people, but to themselves, to be honest with themselves about their biological sex. That trans women are male and that trans men are female. And
but people will hear that. I'm sorry to jump in, but people will hear you saying that and will think that that is incredibly transphobic, and that perhaps there would be an accusation, and I'll let you respond to this, that maybe you're oversimplifying things a little bit. I mean, sometimes someone's gender may not correspond to their sex at birth, as I'm sure you are well aware. Now, that, just out of respect, just out of kindness to those people, isn't it nice to use a different gender, use their preferred gender to describe them?
What do you mean by gender?
Well, I mean that, of course, some people are born in one particular sex. So I was born a male, and I am lucky enough that also my gender matches the sex in which I was born. I identify as male, and I am a male by my sexual, biological, physical presence. However, some people, they are, as I'm sure I don't need to explain, but some people are born perhaps male, and they are born in the male sex. They have the male genitalia. Their physical outward appearance is that of a male. However, their gender that they identify as is different, is female. Now, whether you end up in a situation where you want to transition, have surgery or whatever to align those two, and that's just one example, is down to the individual. But that's how I see the difference between sex and gender.
What's a female gender? More importantly, what's a male gender? Or just as importantly, what's a male gender? What do you mean by gender?
Well, actually, that's a very good point. I mean, I guess I'm probably going to start reeling off absurdly stereotypical social constructs that will come up with that gender. And of course, whilst coming up with the word gender, I also respectfully say that some people identify as having neither gender, or more than one gender, or more than three genders. I kind of see it as something that is fluid and something that you feel about yourself, but that is different to the physical sex side of things. But again, I'm open to being educated. If I've got that wrong, I'm really open to it, because I know that sometimes this is a bit of a minefield.
You're not going to offend me. I promise you that. You're not going to offend me. I think it's interesting you can't define gender. And you talked about social stereotypes. And when sometimes when people talk about gender, they say that they feel like a man or they feel like a woman. What does it feel like to be a man? What does it feel like to be a woman? How do you know this? How do you know that what you feel is feeling like a man?
Because I guess, I mean, if you're asking me, and again, I suppose this is we're almost getting onto the realms of philosophy here, but if you're asking me, I feel that I don't feel strange looking down at my male parts and feeling like I am a man. And so I am lucky enough to not feel like that. May I ask, Miranda, have you transitioned yourself?
Yes, I have.
And may I ask what your circumstances of transitioning? I don't know. I presume that was... Well, I won't make a presumption. What was your transition, if you don't mind me asking?
What do you mean?
Well, were you transitioning from what gender were you transitioning from and to, if you don't mind me asking?
Oh, well, clearly I'm male.
Yeah.
I'm still male, even though I've had surgery. I'm male, and I can recognise that. And I don't really see why this has become such a big deal to deny the existence of one's biological sex. I think as well, I'd really be interested in understanding what it is that J.K. Rowling said that was transphobic. Well,
I guess people are saying that nowadays, if you are going to specifically state the sex that has periods, well, that's transphobic, because there are some people who don't identify as women who will say they have periods. So there are going to be some trans men who have transitioned to men or whom are living as men, even though they are biologically female. They wish to be identified as men, and by calling them and by specifically only saying women have periods, that's seen as transphobic. By the way, I don't necessarily agree that it is. I'm just explaining.
That's okay. That's okay. Again, you don't have to worry about treading on eggshells.
No. Well, I'm not just with you. I'm just also conscious that I have an audience whom not only am I trying to sort of bring with me, but I also don't want to offend any of, and I know how sensitive this subject can be. Is that transphobic to say that? Is it transphobic to say only women have periods, or is it transphobic, or is it offensive to women to say that people have periods?
I think it's only offensive if we now live in a world where there is such a thing as a hate fact. Not every woman has periods, not every woman menstruates, but only women have periods and only women menstruate, women being adult human females, male members of the female sex. When we talk, it's interesting, we've talked about offending people and about how worried we are about offending people. 2 points. First of all, no one has the right not to be offended. Second of all, did you see any of the tweets that trans activists sent to J.K. Rowling about her statement on Saturday night? I think it was Saturday night. Did you see any of the statements that she made around Maya Forstater's case in December? Did you see any of the tweets that trans activists sent to her when she made that statement as well? Have you seen any of these tweets?
No, I have, and I've been on the receiving end of both before. I've been on the receiving end of the radical trans community on Twitter. I've been in the receiving end of the radical feminist community on Twitter, and both can be as vile, as toxic as each other, and both, I like to think, aren't representative of the wider communities in general, because if they were, then both sides appear to be fairly toxic. Why do you think... Can I just ask a question, though? Because you just said that no one has the right not to be offended. I disagree with that. I think when it comes to your race, your identified gender, your sexual orientation, your age, and those sorts of identified and protected characteristics isn't the entire point of equality legislation, that we actually don't have the right to be offended when it comes to feeling discriminated in those areas of life?
Why is talking about reality discrimination? A point relating to the point that you made before as well about the way that words are being used.
Yeah.
Talking about menstruators or people who menstruate. How would you feel as a gay man being defined not as being a gay man, but being as defined as, for example, a man who does not have sex with women? How would that work for you? Would that do the job? Would you be happy with that sort of description?
As a man who has sex with other men is what you're...
No. As a man who does not have sex with women, or a man who is not attracted to women. So you're no longer allowed to use the expression "I'm a gay man." You now have to say "I'm a man who is not romantically attracted to women." Would that float your boat?
It wouldn't offend me, but I would think it would seem a bit silly. It wouldn't offend me. I can't say that I would sit there. But then what I am privileged enough to be, Miranda, is not part of a repressed group as women were. And I think sometimes in the history of this debate, women and the history of women having been repressed by men has been forgotten. And that's why I think it's become such a toxic debate. And that's why I think the word woman to women who are born biologically women is so important to them, because they've had to fight for that word. They've had to fight for that place. Whereas I don't know whether you can make the same comparison when comparing it towards men, because men traditionally have never been repressed.
Well,
does that make sense? Because that's why I think this argument is so toxic, because women over the centuries have traditionally been repressed by patriarchy, by men. The male sexual genitalia, and I think I can say that at 27 minutes to 11 on a Tuesday night, the male reproductive genitalia has been a literal and metaphorical tool to repress women for centuries, for absolutely centuries. So actually, I understand completely why women in that context in 2020 do not want to share their safe spaces with those particular physical attributes. I almost don't think it matters whom those attributes are attached to or what life those people who have those attributes are living. To me, it's an ideological argument that women who have been repressed for centuries have a right to make.
Don't women also deserve the dignity and privacy of being able to define their own spaces and their own boundaries? Can I pick you up on what you said about radfems on Twitter? Has a radfem ever told you to kill yourself or called you a C word?
Yes. Not to kill myself, but I've been called a C word. I remember once...
By a radical feminist?
Yes, I remember once specifically, Miranda, I covered Mike Graham's show on this radio station, right? Mm-hmm. And there was... and I remember I blocked so many because my entire journey home on the bus from London Bridge to Brixton was spent with me just having to block people for 20 minutes. And I'll tell you why, and I'll tell you why it was so toxic. I was interviewing a gentleman who had made a joke about a trans woman not being a woman. I can't remember what the joke was. It was some silly joke on Twitter, and the police had gone round and spoken to him. And I interviewed that person, and I actually agreed that person should be able... I think he made one of those jokes, I'm going to identify as a fish tomorrow if you're going to identify as something else. One of those really silly jokes. And the police went round and spoke to him. And I interviewed him, and I said to him that although I agreed he had the right to make that kind of joke, actually it wasn't particularly kind, and was it really helpful to the debate? Now, I'm a journalist, and the point of a journalist is to take the devil's advocate opinion of the person you've got on the radio with you. Even if you agree with them wholeheartedly, you have to question them. Because I didn't go on the radio and agree with every word he'd said about sending that tweet, the barrage of abuse I got from radical feminists who had decided that I had thrown women under the bus. I was being accused of allowing men to want to go into changing rooms. I was being accused, I'm surprised they didn't have a photo of me on the grassy knoll in the 60s with a shotgun next to Kennedy, frankly, because I was being accused of every single toxic thing under the sun. So to say that the debate is only toxic on one side, I think is misjudged, because I know for a fact I've been a victim of those people who are so anti-trans rights that even when you question someone, they can't accept it.
I didn't say there wasn't toxicity on both sides.
No, I'm just making that point, but go on.
Yeah, it's quite... that particular word has got quite a deep meaning for radical feminists not wishing to speak for or above radical feminists. And it's quite unusual to use that as an insult, because the thought, the idea is that it's a part of a woman's body, and using such a beautiful formative part of the woman's body that's so important in bringing life into the world as pejorative is at its very heart misogyny. So it surprises me greatly that radical feminists would use those words to describe.
Oh yeah. I cannot tell you the abuse. Do you know what it was? And I started off by trying to relay back. And look, this isn't about me, but just so that you know that I'm totally telling the truth here. I started off actually by trying to explain, saying, no, actually, I'm kind of with you. I just don't think that it was very helpful in the debate. They were not having it. I was being accused of every single thing under the sun, and I was being sworn at by all sorts of people. So it is toxic, I'm afraid, on that side as well, which I know you accept. What I'm asking, though, going forward is, do you think that there is a resolution here that would work for both sides? Do you think that ever there will be a situation where people who are pro-trans, who are supportive and respectful of trans people being referred to as their preferred gender, do you think that will ever be able to live alongside women who also want to use that word and want to feel that their rights are being respected? Can they coexist?
I think that, well, I think that coexistence is possible. I have to say that, because in my heart I'm an optimist boy, and I always look forward to a bright and shiny future. I think the trans community has got some way to go to make this into any form of possibility. I think it's important that we can recognise that our biological sex is what it is. We are born that way, and what we do afterwards is we're in control of our destiny, but we are given the hand that we are dealt. I think it's important as well to recognise that human beings are dimorphic creatures, that we are male or female. I think there is a huge problem.
What about intersex?
Intersex people are all of them are either male or female. There is no third sex. Intersex itself is a misnomer. People who are classified under being intersex, they're not some magical third sex. There's no third gamete. It's a huge red herring within this debate. And think about this. If trans women are not men, they are a magical third sex. They are that magical third sex. They are not women. It's self-contradictory, and I think it's a poor argument for trans
if you met a trans man or woman nowadays, mm-hmm. and they said, I'd like to be referred to as a woman, would you do that? Or would you still refer to them in their presence as a man?
I'm transsexual myself. This is the life that I lead. I know lots of people, and I have lots of friends who are transsexual, people who have socially changed.
So do you mind if you're misgendered, or if someone still referred to you as a male, would you feel offended by that? I'm male.
It is what it is. What am I going to do about that? You know, you can't change it.
What about those people?
You can, as they say, live your best life.
But what about, Miranda, those people, though, whom it is really important to? Those people whom, and as I've said before, we've seen that there is more likelihood of mental illness, of potential for suicide among young trans people.
It's not true. The propensity towards suicide is no greater than the population of other children who are LGB, and also if this is a mental health issue, then it needs to be recognised as a mental health issue.
But anything that contribute to the better mental health among the all LGB and T youth is good, and even if it's equivalent to the rest of the LGB community, I mean those aren't stats to be proud of anyway. And I guess my question for you, Miranda, is it's brilliant that you are okay being referred to as male still, but to a young trans person whom it is so important that actually their gender that they are referred to matches the gender that they feel that they are. I'm not talking about sex, I'm talking about gender. Will that make a huge difference if you were to refer to them as their preferred gender? What harm would it do, I guess, is the question.
I think affirming the belief in young people that they are the wrong sex to which they're born, effectively saying that their personality does not match their body, is the height of modern day cruelty that we do in our society. And I think it is completely wrong to affirm a transgender identity in any child.
But what if they grow up? There are millions of people who've grown up to change their gender through transition and to actually physically change, and they've gone on to be extremely happy. So
that's great. And they all did those changes when they were adults, and they did those changes when they'd had the chance to get married and have children. Why deny those opportunities to other people?
Well, I guess some would say wasted time. I mean, I remember I came out.
Exactly what's happening now.
I came out when I was 22, and I'm absolutely still now, 20 years on, kicking myself because I should have done it when I was 16 or 17, but I was scared, and I'll never get back. I'll never get back those years of being a young sort of teenager in love with people. And if someone else can be spared having to wait longer to be their true self, then I would be absolutely in favour of offering them that.
I get that totally. As someone myself who's had pretty much a lifelong battle with their own sexual orientation before finally accepting it, I'll say to you, I completely agree with what you're saying. And I think that we need to address the issue. We still have this persistent issue of homophobia within our society, and it's incredibly sad that the source of much of this homophobia is actually the trans community, and our own LGBT organisations that are supposed to be supporting lesbian and gay people have done nothing other than put a stick in the wasp's nest and agitate this problem that exists within the LGBT community with trans people.
Okay, well, look, we've got someone who is very pro-trans rights coming on, Benjamin Butterworth, really, really great journalist. We'll put some of these points.
He's not even trans. Why have you got him on?
Well, because he's very much an advocate for trans rights. I mean,
he's not an advocate for trans rights. He's not trans himself, and B, I would defy him to define trans rights. What trans rights is he arguing about? The right to change people's language. That's completely off the that's completely out of the
With
pitch.
respect, why do you have to be trans to advocate for trans rights? I'm not black, and I've done a phone-in for the last week about how terrible racism is. Can I only talk about that if I'm black?
No, you can't, but I find it
well, then then you're completely contradicting yourself. I'm sorry, can I only talk about gay rights if I'm gay? Can I only talk about women's rights if I'm a woman?
I'm not contradicting myself at all. I'm saying it's quite extraordinary. You've got someone to come in and advocate for trans rights that isn't even trans.
I think it's a brilliant thing we've got someone coming in to advocate for trans rights who isn't trans, because it just goes to show you don't need to be trans to advocate for those rights. And if you do...
Exactly. This is what I'm doing here. I'm advocating for trans rights. I'm advocating for the right of trans people who live a life informed by reality. Those of us out there who say that, yes, we are male, we recognise that, and we live our lives saying that we are male. We get bullied, we get petitions set up to kick us out of our trade unions, kick us out, we get our employers harassed. It's absolutely shameful of what happens for those of us who accept reality.
All right, well, Miranda, there are some that would say, respectfully, that you're arguing the total opposite side of the trans argument for pro-trans rights, and that actually trans rights are the precise opposite of what you are saying, and that's why we'll put those points to someone else. Really appreciate talking to you. That's Miranda Yardley. We'll put some more of her points to our particular advocate, who is going to be Ben Butterworth. We'll talk to him coming up, and then from 11 o'clock we'll do more on this, and we'll talk about how you've kept your weight in control in lockdown. All of that and more here on talkRADIO.